Hello, everyone, and welcome into Senior Living Live. My name is Melissa. As always, I hope you are having a fantastic day today. Well, I am very pleased to introduce you to one of my favorite guest presenters. Her name is Diane Lang, and she is a decorated therapist and life coach. And I think you're going to get a lot out of her presentation today. She is excellent at her craft, and she is going to help caregivers find ways to manage stress and care for themselves in order to care for others. That makes sense, right? Well, we are discussing compassion fatigue, among other things. And I know this is a topic that isn't widely discussed because there's some guilt associated with it. We are offering a chance for all of you watching to send your questions or comments to Diane. You can do this anonymously if you like. A reminder to everyone that all audio and video lines will be muted throughout our webinar here today, which we expect to last about an hour. Now, to be a part of the discussion, you can scroll down to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and I will read all of your questions and comments to Diane at the end of her presentation. Diane, as always, it is fantastic to see you, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for having me. So we're going to talk about caregiver fatigue, caring for the caregiver. And I have to be honest, this topic is really close to my heart because I have been a therapist and an educator as well as a life coach for years now. And one of the things that we see is that people in our fields, whether you're a nurse on the medical side, doctor, whether you're a case manager, a social worker, a counselor, an educator, we tend to forget about ourselves. We tend to put ourselves in the bottom of the priority list. And that's something that has made a lot of us have burnout before we need to. And I know for me, that is one of them. I am one of them. I have burnt out a few times in this field, and I know a lot of people have, and I've had to learn how to deal with caregiver fatigue, not just to teach, but for myself. So I'm going to go through as much as I can. And please, at the end, feel free to let me know any questions, thoughts, comments. You can put them up there now, and I'll try to end about 10, 15 minutes early to answer everything. So we're going to start off with thinking about what is caregiver fatigue. And I just want to start that almost everybody is a caregiver. You know, we always think of caregivers as people who work in the field or people who stay home to take care of their parents or anybody who's sick. But I just want to tell you, almost everybody is a caregiver. If you're a parent, you're a caregiver. For a lot of us parents, we're caregivers that were taking care of our kids and our parents. We call that the sandwich generation. It might be that you're taking care of your furry friends. You have a dog, a cat, or anybody who is in need. So everybody really is a caregiver. And we always kind of think about only certain people being a caregiver, but it really is so many of us. And I think a lot of us have learned that during COVID because we realized that we really became such a big caregiver with everybody being home, whether it's our spouse, our kids, our parents. We really had a lot of caregiving going on. So caregiver burnout has really been at a high level with COVID really in the last year, because believe it or not, we're almost at a year of COVID, right? So the exact definition is caregiver burnout. And you probably have heard of burnout because a lot of times we talk about burnout with corporate, that people get corporate burnout. With the pandemic, we've talked about pandemic burnout. With parents, we've talked about family burnout due to COVID, but there's also caregiver burnout. And that's when we're in a state of complete physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental exhaustion. It's when we're so fatigued that we just can't really do anything else. And that could be for a few days. It could be for a few weeks. It could be for a few months. So we really want to think about, am I burnt out or am I getting close to burnout? That's one of the really deep questions to ask yourself. If you're not burnt out yet, do you feel that you're getting to a place of burnout? Because a lot of times we can start seeing the signs and symptoms as we're going through it. And one of the biggest signs are people who are feeling positive about their caregiving, whether it's their job or it's their family, but all of a sudden that positive caregiver role has turned into feeling negative, unconcerned. They feel they've lost compassion and empathy. And that is quite common with any type of caregiver burnout. So, burnout can happen when we put ourselves in the bottom of the priority list, when we don't get the help we need. And that could be help, whether it's physical, whether it's self care for ourselves, or even financial. And we just end up burning out slowly. So, that is the good news. Most of the people that I have worked with who have had this have really burnt out very slowly. Like they had signs and symptoms. And when they look back in hindsight, they could say, God, I knew I was burning out, but they felt like they had to go on. They felt there was no other option. They felt guilt if they didn't go on. So really start paying attention if you're starting to burn out. And again, you can notice the burnout, and I'll go a little more into it, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. It can happen in all different areas or all of it. The other thing is many caregivers also feel completely guilty if they spend time on themselves instead of in their job or taking care of the people that they loved. And they really end up feeling such guilt that they'll go way past what they really can do. And you'll see that's part of it. If you're getting to a place where your stress levels are high or your stress has turned into anxiety or depression, you're starting to really get to that burnout. And just a few things to remember for this. Stress is very common. We all have stress. We're always all going to have stress. Unfortunately, we can't live a stress-free life as much as I wish we could. But when stress turns into anxiety, there is a difference. And that's something you want to pay attention to because when it does turn into anxiety, the symptoms and the signs change. So when there's stress, you feel stressed out. There is a trigger, there's a stressor. But when it's turned to anxiety, it reaches a different level. And even if the trigger or the stressor is gone, the anxiety stays. And the anxiety usually turns into ruminations of thoughts where you're having constant thoughts that go on all day that affect your focus, your attention span, your memory, your moods. It affects all of that. You're sleeping, you're eating. Those are big things. And the thoughts that are ruminating all day are thoughts of fear, excessive worry, doom and gloom. And the other sign could be that you have anxiety attacks. And I've seen this with a lot of caregivers. And, I have one who's a caregiver, a client who said this to me a few weeks ago. And she said, I didn't realize how burnt out I was till I put my kids to bed. I'm taking care of my mom who has cancer. I made sure she was safe and in bed. And all of a sudden, I went to lay down. My husband's next to me. Everyone's safe. The house is quiet. And all of a sudden, she goes, my heart was racing so fast. She goes, I didn't know why. I wasn't sick. Nothing was going on. I didn't hurt myself. She goes, and then all of a sudden, she goes, I was getting dizzy. My head hurt. My stomach was turning. She goes, I felt nauseous. I was getting all hot and sweaty. She goes, and at first I thought, oh my God, COVID. And she goes, and then I realized, oh my God, this must be a panic attack. And she woke up her husband because it was so bad and she was so afraid. Thankfully, it was only anxiety. It was not COVID or any other sickness. But the next day she woke up and she said she felt so burnt out and her sleep was horrible. She slept a few hours, kept waking up, having stressed out dreams. And the next day she was just so fatigued that her husband had to stay home from work to help. She just couldn't do it anymore. And that is common that we get these anxiety attacks because we hold on to so much of the stress. We're grieving as caregivers, whatever the people we love are going through, and we're grieving maybe their old attitudes and ways, the ways we love them, the old norm. We could be grieving our own schedules, our old routines. We could be grieving what our life used to look like. And then all of a sudden, everything is just, stress and anxiety. So really think about this. Anxiety attacks can happen very easily. They can feel like they're coming out of nowhere, like a spontaneous anxiety attack, but really it's not spontaneous. It's because we're having all those rumination of thoughts. The other thing is that we can go into a depression. and watching that as well, because depression will cause a lot of the rumination of thoughts, but those thoughts are more on hopelessness, helplessness, sadness, loneliness. So they will cause the same disruption in your day. They can affect your memory, your attention span, your concentration, your daily, eating, sleeping schedule. But the thoughts, the ruminating thoughts go differently. So you really want to be careful and be mindful if your stress has turned into anxiety and depression, or if you feel yourself burning out, especially now with pandemic burnout. It's very easy to burn out. So really being careful of that. And again, a lot of us are frontline workers. We talk a lot about frontline workers being the people at the supermarkets, our doctors, our nurses, our cops, our firemen, and they're absolutely frontline workers. But I think a lot of times they forget that the rest of us are as well, the social workers, the counselors, the teachers, anybody works in any kind of senior living, assisted living, nursing homes, group homes. And there's so much pressure being an essential worker in this environment, as well as just all of the stress of being a caregiver during COVID. So really important to just watch all of these signs and symptoms, because we're seeing a lot more of it. We keep talking about the pandemic, but the other thing we're seeing is that we're having really, an emergency, a crisis with mental health. And not only is it the people that, we're taking care of that could be having anxiety and depression, but it's also us who are working in the field. So just being aware of that. So some of the factors as we're talking about is one, as caregivers, we're often so busy tending to everybody else's needs that we tend to forget about ourselves. And again, when we put ourselves on the bottom of the priority list, or if you want to think about it in this way, when we think about coming back to like intro to psych and intro to business, you probably remember Abraham Maslow, and he had the hierarchy of needs, a pyramid, right? And on the bottom was your basic needs, and on the top was self-actualization. And one of the things was, if you couldn't get through your basic needs, how could you move up the ladder to get to that full potential? And a lot of us forget our basic needs. We become overwhelmed, we become fatigued, and then we lead to that burnout and anxiety. So making sure that you tend to your own needs, and we'll get a little bit more into that. Lacking the self-awareness of, oh my God, am I burnt out? And that is the big question, as we were just talking about. So being aware if your stress has turned to anxiety or your stress has turned into depression, those are some great signs to be mindful of. If you constantly notice that your moods are changing all the time, you're so fatigued, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And I see a lot of caregivers will say, I just can't focus anymore. My memory is shot, not just physically. So pay attention to the mental and emotional side. Those are just as important. Role confusion. So many people are confused when they're thrown into the role of caregiver, because it's really hard to separate sometimes being the caregiver as well as also being maybe the spouse, if you're taking care of a spouse, being a mom or a dad, taking care of your kids, or just being the daughter or the son, taking care of your parents. That's so many different roles, and that can cause so much confusion of who am I, identity, who am I supposed to be? Should I be the wife or the husband, or should I be the caregiver? Can I do both? And that is a really big problem. I've seen a lot of people who are caregivers say that the marriage has suffered because they're taking care of their wife or their husband, and they don't know how to be both the wife, husband, and a caregiver. And the same with friends, if you're doing it working in the field. I've had a lot of people work in the field and they're great working in the field, but they come home, they're so burnt out, they can't be that caregiver at home as well. So really watch your role confusion and think about, how do you identify yourself in certain situations, and just make sure that you really can separate them both. And then giving yourself permission to be self-compassionate. So all of us in this field, we're very compassionate people. We're very empathetic, sympathetic, caring, kind. It's part of the job. It's part of who we have to be in this role. But for many of us, and I see this a lot, we are so great to others, but how we treat others is not how we treat ourselves. we tend to not give ourselves that self-compassion, that kindness, that self-kindness. We're not empathetic towards ourselves. We'll be more judgmental, harsh, critical towards ourselves. We wouldn't act that way towards others. So really think about, are you allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to feel the emotions that come up as a caregiver? I know for me, I'm listening to so many people who are so depressed. And, I was just talking to another therapist the other day saying this January 2021 was way more depressing than the holidays were for my clients. And usually the holidays are the hardest time, but I'm seeing January and still now into February of 2021 being some of the hardest times I've seen in my 20 plus years in this field. And that is so hard to see, to listen to constantly over and over again. And if we don't give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves, to give the same compassion and kindness to ourselves as we would towards others, we're going to burn out. So self-compassion has to play a huge role in kind of healing through this caregiver burnout. So some other factors to think about is a lot of people will say, well, I can't be self-compassion. I can't give myself that kindness because if I do, I think I'm being kind of like irresponsible or being selfish. And I want you to know self-care and selfish are two completely different things. Two completely different things. Selfish and self-care are nothing alike. And this is the way I want you to think about taking care of yourself. You can't give what you don't have. So if you're not in a good place that you can't even take care of yourself, how could you be there for others? So you really want to take responsibility and invest in yourself, because the more you invest with yourself, the better of a caregiver you'll be, the more motivated you will be in caring for others, the more enthusiastic, the more kind, the better caregiver you will absolutely be. So please don't mix the two. Self-care and selfish, they don't go hand in hand. And I've heard this a lot for years from a lot of caregivers who are parents. They always felt selfish, right? We've heard of mommy guilt, feeling selfish, doing things for ourselves. But again, you can't give what you don't have. And the other part is if you have kids, you have grandkids, anybody, they learn through role modeling, imitation, and observation. They're visual learners, especially from birth till puberty, which that 2-year process can go anywhere from like 9, 10 years old to 14. So they're really learning through your actions. So if you want your kids to take care of themselves and to learn to take care of themselves, we have to be that role model. So really make sure that you make yourself that priority. The other thing to think about is there's a lack of control when we're a caregiver. And this is, common to feel because when we feel a lack of control, which a lot of us have felt during COVID, right? We couldn't control the illness. We couldn't control how long it was going to last, what it was going to look like. We can't control the vaccine and how that's going to affect us. Will we need a booster shot? All of that. So we can become very frustrated by the lack of help, by the lack of resources, by the lack of money. There's a lot of reasons why we are. So one of the suggestions that we talk about here for caregivers is when you know that there's a lack of control, and again, that is because we can't really decide someone's health, what it looks like, how long it's going to take them to heal. We're not in control of those things, right? We can only control ourselves. But what we can do is we can literally, if you are a caregiver, especially for family, loved ones, spouse, kids, anything like that, is to get as much information as you can about the situation, about the illness, whatever they're going through, the hospital, whatever it is. Get as much information as you can. And I want you to remember this: knowledge is the enemy of fear. That's a big one. Knowledge is the enemy of fear. The more knowledge, the more information we have, the more we take back our power. We feel that sense of control, and it pushes the fear and the stress away because it gives us the information to take actionable steps. So get all that information, make sure all your information's up to date, it's reliable, then sit down with everybody else who is part of this situation and talk about all the information, brainstorm, problem solve, troubleshoot together. And together you can take little micro steps. Now, again, we can't control certain things. We can't control an illness, the medicine they need to take, how it affects them, how long it'll take, the healing process. But we can make small little baby steps, whether it's, getting more resources, reaching out to people who can help us, getting money, even if we have to look in different places, take out loans, GoFundMe, whatever it is. But everybody can work together to make this brainstorming in solution-based answers. So the more information you have, the more you take back your power. And if it's work related, then it's everybody. When I worked at a rehabilitation center, we would have meetings every Friday that everybody, from me, the mental health therapist, to the PTs, the OTs, the speech, the case managers, the group home managers, everybody would come together so we could get all the information as much as possible and brainstorm ways to make it easier, not just for the client, but for us. And that's so really important. So get that information. Remember that knowledge is the enemy of fear. And remember, when you think about selfish and self-care, thinking about you can't give what you don't have. Really two important lines in here. The other one is unreasonable demands. So, and what we mean by that is we place the most unreasonable, high demands, unrealistic on ourselves. Because a lot of us will think that it's only our responsibility. Well, it's my spouse, it's my kids, it's my parent, it's my job. And we feel like we are the main person who has to do everything. And the one thing we have to realize is we can't do anything alone. It's a really important thing to remember. We can't heal, we can't grieve, we can't forgive, we can't move forward without help. So when we try to do things alone, all we do is push other people away and stress ourselves out. So you want to reach out. This is one thing. If you're noticing that you're making all the responsibility on yourself and you're feeling all that pressure and you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, remember to reach out. Reach out to extended family, reach out to siblings, reach out to resources, other workers. Make sure to reach out. It is so important that we do that. And I watch, some of you may know, my clientele as a therapist is traumatic brain injury and spinal injury. So a lot of my clients are paralyzed from their chest and waist or waist down, and they can't drive again. Some of them see double. A lot of them have such dizziness. Some of them have seizures. And I work with some clients that I still go to their houses even during COVID because they could not do online counseling. And the one thing I always talk about with the family is making sure that they don't take the responsibility themselves and they reach out and get the help, whether it is putting them into a specific place, a home, or a senior living where they're getting more help, whether it's reaching out to family, having nurses at their house, whatever it is. We can't do anything alone. And that's part of our emotional basic needs. Just to remember, we also have emotional basic needs, and that is belonging and acceptance. And that is having a community. It's having that feel that people are there for us, who love us unconditionally without judgment, and that we can be our vulnerable, authentic selves and reach out for the help when we need it. And it might be just a few people you reach out to. It doesn't have to be this big group, but just making sure that you have those people. It is so important. And you can have a mix of both personal, friends, family, as well as professional help, but making sure you have that, because we're really good at putting such unrealistic expectations on ourselves, and it's just an impossibility. What happens is when you try to do things where you're completely the only one in control, or you try to do it perfectly, you set yourself up for failure. So instead of doing that, know you can't do anything alone and reach out. So signs and symptoms of this caregiver burnout, and this could be for yourself, but also to notice in other people. So if there are people in your life who you're working with or other people who are caregivers, really just to know what to look for. So, first, a lot of people withdraw. They kind of withdraw socially, they kind of isolate. And I know this can be very hard to determine now because there is the physical isolation due to COVID, but there is the difference between physical isolation and social isolation. So, yes, people might physically isolate themselves due to COVID, but if you're noticing they're socially isolating, they're not reaching out, whether it's text, email, phone, Zoom, whatever it is, if they're not staying in touch, if they're not answering calls and emails, what was their norm? And now look at how they were acting. That's a big difference. You definitely could look back and go, 6 months ago, were they returning calls? Were they, constantly involved in the text messages? Really paying attention, because the more lonely and isolated people get, the more withdrawn they get. And remembering this, the number one factor of depression outside of mental illness is loneliness and isolation. So we really want to be aware if people are withdrawing. And we're seeing that with some caregivers because they've been isolated, because they're taking care of someone, and because of COVID, they can't go out and be with other people. That's the physical isolation. So make sure that they're still staying in touch, even if it's virtually. Loss of interest in activities that they previously enjoyed, whatever that was, hobbies, sports, reading, cooking, whatever it is, but you notice they're not doing it anymore and they have no interest in doing it. Feeling blue or irritable, hopeless, helpless. And remember, these are tough months to begin with. So January and February are not only are they post-holiday blues, which happens every year for a lot of people. We also are in the months of seasonal affective disorder, or the winter blues, where it's the shorter days, it's cold, it's dark, we're kind of stuck in just because of the weather. So people could be feeling even more blue or irritable just because of those situations, COVID, winter blues, post-holiday blues, as well as caregivers. So there could be a lot going on. Changes in their appetite or changes in sleeping patterns. When people are anxious, they tend to eat less, but they're eating more sugar and caffeine foods because they're just not sleeping well. You get less sleep when you're anxious, and they're trying to keep their energy levels up. When we're depressed, we tend to eat more for the comfort and the loneliness, and we tend to sleep longer to use it as like a defense mechanism, a way of avoidance or numbing or escaping. So really watch that. It could go either way depending if they're anxious or depressed. And just a few things here. If people are anxious, stressed out, if you're feeling restless, nervous, fearful, watch your caffeine and your sugar, because caffeine and sugar tend to make us more nervous, jittery, and restless. So I'm not saying don't have a cup of coffee or a cookie. Believe me, I can't live without my chocolate. But don't binge on it or use it as an excess. And the same if you notice people are depressed or you're feeling that way, watch your alcohol. It's a depressant. Changes in our illness. So when people are stressed, they lower their immune system, which is one thing we don't want, especially during COVID. But we also have to remember it's the winter, it's colds, it's flus, it's pneumonias. We don't talk about that as much, but it still exists, right? So when we're stressed and anxious, depressed, we lower our immune system. And the one thing to know about this is stress is one of the biggest factors in sickness. Here's the exact stat: 90% of doctor visits to your general practitioner, your family doctor, 90% are stress related. And that stat is pre-COVID. So I can imagine what it might be looking at this point. But stress plays such a role in our immune system, how often we get sick. And it's so important to remember this too. Stress plays a really big role on flaring up illnesses that we have, like autoimmune. Like I have a client who has MS, and when things are pretty good, she walks in. When she is stressed and has things going on and she's anxious or fearful, she's coming in with a walker or a wheelchair. It flares us up. So remembering that too, like for me as a caregiver, I have a very strange illness called laryngopharyngeal reflex. Don't know if you ever heard of it. And it's very similar to Barrett's, but Barrett's is in your esophagus, mine is in my throat. So basically, I have third-degree burns on my throat, and it burned my throat shut for over a year. It took me over a year to be able to eat. I had to learn how to swallow again, which is very similar to a lot of my clients who have strokes. So one of the things I know, even though I can never be fully healed, unfortunately, there's no cure, but I got as healed as I was going to get. When I'm stressed, it hits my throat instantly. I have a hard time swallowing, eating, talking. So paying attention to it because it affects us as caregivers as well. Of course, if people are really depressed, it could go down into suicide thoughts, wanting to hurt yourself, or wanting to hurt the people you're caring for. So remember that. That is something we have to pay attention to. Emotional and physical, mental, spiritual exhaustion, very irritable, moody, snappy. You kind of feel like people around you will say they feel like they're walking on eggshells around you, or if there's people who have burnout near you, you feel like you're walking on eggshells around them and you never know what to expect. And sometimes for us, when we're burning out, we don't even know what to expect from ourselves. So these are just some signs and symptoms, again, not just for you, but people you know and people you love. So this way we can be one step ahead of it. So self-compassion. And plays like a really big role in taking care of ourselves, especially as caregivers. Because again, we're so good at being compassionate to others, but not to ourselves. So compassion is the ability to show empathy, love, kindness, and concern to people who are in difficult spots. But for us, self-compassion is doing that same thing, that love, that kindness, that empathy, but towards ourselves. And again, so many caregivers are so great at being compassionate to others, but not to ourselves. So you really want to look at being a best friend to yourself. That is the best way I can think about it. We treat ourselves different than we would treat others. So if you had a friend who came to you who was a caregiver, was telling you how stressed out and anxious they were, you would give them compassion. You would be empathetic. You would give love, but you don't do the same thing to yourself. So I want you to treat yourself the way you would treat somebody else. I want you to think about it that way. We'll get a little more into it. So here it is. How would you treat a friend? And here's an exercise you can actually do for yourself. So think about it this way. So if a close friend or family member, whoever it is, doesn't matter, girl, boy, whatever it is, if they're struggling in any kind of way and they come to you as a friend, and especially if you're really close or good friends, and they tell you that they are just burning out, they're so stressed, whether it's their career as a caregiver, teacher, educator, they're taking care of their own family, parents, whatever it is, write down what you typically would do. Would you be that active, empathetic listener, right? Would you show them kindness? Would you be empathetic and answer with empathy, saying, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. What could I do to help? Let me know. Would you give suggestions? Would you be kind? Would you give them a hug? What would you do? Think about that. It's your close friend or family member sitting there telling you they're burning out. How would you respond to them? Then think about times when you're feeling bad about yourself or you're struggling. How do you typically respond to yourself? Think back to past times when you were struggling and you were going through something. How did you respond to yourself? Were you kind? Were you empathetic? Did you listen to yourself? Or instead, did your tone of voice change? Did you beat yourself up? Were you critical? Were you harsh? Were you judgmental? What do you typically say? And when you write down both how you would treat a friend and how you would treat yourself, and then you look at the two and you compare them, you can see such a difference. I have a lot of my clients do this. I'll have them write down a letter to themselves and a letter to, what they would say to their friends, given any kind of tough, challenging situation. And the difference of the two is so amazing. You want to think about that, noticing the difference. And when you do notice the difference, asking yourself, why? Why do you treat yourself so different? What is the difference there? Why would you be harsh and judgmental to yourself, but yet not to your friend or your family member. Really figure out why. Does any fear come up? Does any anxiety? Does any guilt? What comes up for you? Then I want you to write down how you think things would change if you treated yourself with the same kindness and empathy that you did with a friend. So if you treated yourself the way you treated your friend, how would things change? Would you be able to take a deep breath? Would you feel cared for, less alone? Would you feel more able to be open and vulnerable and ask for help? Really think about this. Write this out. Exercises like this are best done if you write them out old school, pen and paper, because when we write things out, it's more concrete, it's more therapeutic, and we can also hold on to it to use it if this happens again, because you might be a caregiver now and then things shift and then 5 years down the road, or even just how you treat yourself in any kind of tough, challenging times. Doesn't always have to just be, caregiver times, but in anything. That is one of the most important tools. And when I have my clients do this, it gives them a lot of self-awareness to how different they treat themselves. And sometimes they never even realized it. And sometimes my clients will ask their friends, when you're going through a tough time, am I somebody that you come to? Am I kind? Am I empathetic? And they get that. And then they'll ask, do you notice how I treat myself when I'm going through a tough time? And they can get that information as well. So, it's up to you how you want to do it. But writing it down is always beneficial. And this is one of those exercises you can keep. And I will absolutely send the PowerPoint so you have a copy of this and you can use it for whenever, or you can give it to somebody who's going through a hard time. Then there's give yourself a break exercise. I like giving out exercises and homework, as you can tell. So in this one, I want you to think of a situation, a time in your life that was difficult, that was challenging, you struggled through, it caused you stress. Get that situation in your mind and see what comes up for you in your body. When you think about this tough time, what comes up for you? And think about what comes up as in the suffering, whether it's emotional, mental, physical. It could be like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. Oh, that was so hard. I don't know how I got through it. It could be all of how it made you feel. I was always tired. I never slept. My whole body, I was always having headaches. What was going on? And why, I really want you to relate to this because it's so important to realize how much suffering we can cause ourselves. But I also want you to realize this: suffering is what makes us all human. It's what we all have in common. And it's the one thing everybody understands. So when you want to ask for help, but you're too afraid to ask for help, or you feel that no one's going to be there, or that they're going to think you're selfish, and whatever other word you say, remember that everybody has suffered. And that's where empathy comes from. Every one of us has felt pain, has felt hurt, whether it's physical, emotional, probably both at this point in life. And it's what gives us that thread that we all connect to each other. So, and why I want you to also know how it makes you feel is because it helps you relate to how others feel. We all have what we call a pain body. So we all hold stress, anxiety, anger, hurt on our bodies. So just knowing how it feels, because that helps us relate to others when they need it, when they're empathetic. And it allows us to give ourselves a break knowing everybody feels just the way I do. I'm not the only one who feels like this. Pandemic burnout, corporate burnout, caregiver burnout, they're all very common. And I know pandemic burnout is new, but caregiver and corporate burnout, they've been here forever. And majority of us have felt like that and have burned out one time or another. So it's really important to have that common thread to know we're not alone. Most people have gone through this, unfortunately, maybe to go through it again, and that we all connect and we do all have the ability to empathize with each other. And then do this. How can I be kind to myself? I want you to think about this. What would you need to hear What do you wish other people have said to you? Or what do you wish that you have said to yourself? And they could be such phrases as, it is what it is. I accept myself and this situation as it is, with a deep breath. Just knowing it is what it is. And telling yourself, one of my clients said to me yesterday when he's feeling anxious because unfortunately, this is a young kid in his 20s who has to take care of his parents. Um, Very tough situation, but the parents are both sick. And this college student is taking care of them. And we just went through an exercise very similar. And I said, as a caregiver, but still also as a college student, a young kid, it's like 21, what do you need to hear? And he said, what I need to tell myself and what I want other people to tell me is, you're okay. You're doing okay. You're doing okay. You got this. And that is what he needs to hear. It might be, I accept myself and the situation as is, even though I'm not doing everything perfectly. I'm making some mistakes. I'm using them as teachable, learnable moments, and I'm realizing I'm doing the best I can in the situation I have, or with the information or the resources I have. Maybe it's forgiving yourself. Maybe you have to forgive yourself for making some mistakes, or forgive yourself for not being that kind to you. A lot of times we're so mean to ourselves and we need to forgive ourselves for that. Maybe you need to say, I am strong. I need to be patient. I need to be empathetic. But think of what phrases you need to repeat to yourself, to remind yourself, to affirm. You can think of them as affirmations of what you need for you as part of your self-care. And to give yourself that break and remind yourself, like my client does, where he says, I got this. I'm okay. Or I'm doing the best I can with what I have. I forgive myself for, the mistakes I've made. I'm doing the best. Just reminding yourself, really important. And again, you can use these exercises, writing them down whenever you can. Change your words. Our words and how we speak to ourselves, the negative self-talk, that rumination that goes on in your head. And we all have that. So we have something like 60,000 thoughts a day, right? That's a lot of thoughts. And that's why it always feels like you can't shut your brain off. The other part is at least half are negative. So we all have that self-talk that's going. And one of the great ways to determine what your self-talk is, because a lot of people say, I'm not sure what my negative self-talk is. You can easily do two things. You can either use your phone, the notes, or carry a pad and pen, whatever works for you, and pay attention to the negative self-talk. And these are the times when we hear the negative self-talk the most. And again, it could be different for you, but from clients, this is what I always hear. When they're in the car, kind of zone out and comes up. When they're bored or in silence, thoughts come up. Right before they go to bed and they're evaluating their day, negative thoughts come up. If they wake up in the middle of the night, can't fall back to sleep, it comes up, or when they wake up in the morning. And all you want to do is write down the common words and phrases that keep coming up. You don't want to write down everything, but what keeps coming up for you? I'm never going to make it through this. I can't do this. I'm so overwhelmed. I hate myself. Whatever it is that comes up for you, write it down. Notice the patterns of the negative self-talk. If that's too much, you can wear a rubber band. And this is a really easy technique. It's called snap to awareness. And every time you notice you're having negative thoughts and comments, they don't have to come out loud. They could just be in your head, snap. And just the snapping allows you to go, oh, I'm having a negative thought. Now, when you start noticing you're having these negative thoughts, all I want you to do is say stop. Now, you could do this a few ways. Whenever you notice yourself saying negative thoughts, you hear it in your head, you can say, if you're alone, you could say stop out loud. You could say it in your head, stop. Or you can visualize something that represents stop. Think what works for you. Like, I'm very verbal linguistic. So for me, I want to hear it in my head, stop. For a lot of my clients who are visual, they say they visualize like a stop sign. One client says she visualizes a red light or a yield sign. I have another client, a mom, who says she always visualizes talk to the hand as stop because that's what her kids did to her. You can visualize it, whatever it is. but something that represents stop. Now, once you notice that, you say stop, then you can add in a positive statement instead of the negative. So instead of saying, and I put this example up here, I can't handle this, or this is impossible, I can't do this, you can change it and say, how can I handle this? You can reframe how you look at it. You can frame and say, how can I handle this situation? What could I do? Who could I brainstorm with? Who could I ask for help from? Do I need to handle this? Now, that would be problem-based. So there's two ways to cope with this. You can problem-base a solution, being, okay, how can I handle this? Who do I need to ask? What resources are available? Who could I brainstorm with? And think of your support system. Or you could do emotion-based coping, which is, how can I handle this? I just need a little bit of a break. Maybe I need to go meditate for 5 minutes. I need to go take a walk, a hot bath, whatever it is. There's always two ways of coping. It's problems. How do I solve it? Like solution-based, or it's emotions. And if there is a time or a situation that there's nothing you can do to change it, it's outside of your reach, outside of your control, then deal with the emotions of how can I handle this? How can I take care of me? So we want to change the words. When you hear that positive, self-talk, great. But when it's negative self-talk, become aware of it. Really like watch yourself like a hawk, be aware of your negative, either write down what the patterns are, the common words that you're always using so you become aware, or do the snap to awareness so you feel it and you hear it. Then say stop, or visualize something that represents stop, and then reframe what you're saying. So instead of I can't handle this, or this is impossible, or I can't do this anymore, it's how can I handle this? Who can I talk to? Who can I ask for help? Or it's what can I do for myself at this moment to self-soothe, to calm? And think about really taking care of you. So I know I'm running out of time. I'm just going to wrap up with a few things here and then for questions. Remember this, for managing in any kind of caregiver burnout, fatigue, whatever word you like better, we need a support system. We can't heal, grieve, forgive, or do anything alone. So be aware, who is your support system? Both professionally, personally, who are they? Set realistic expectations for yourself, knowing you can't do this alone, and asking for help is absolutely a form of self-care. Saying no is also another form of self-care. And also be realistic about the disease or the illness. If you're dealing caregiving in that way with somebody you love, be realistic about their disease. And again, get as much information about the situation. And the last thing is try to do one mindfulness technique a day. Mindfulness is the only natural way to de-stress. And when you think of mindfulness, you probably think of like meditation or yoga. And those are great, but those are intentional practices of being mindful. There's so many ways of being mindful. And I just want to give out this one way, and then I'll wrap it up for questions, I promise. When we're stressed and anxious, and we're in the midst of all that, we tend to not think about, being mindful. So this is a very easy breathing technique, and it's just called the 1, 2, 3 technique. Very easy. And all it is taking a deep breath in for a count of 3 through the nose, holding for a count of 3, and exhaling through the mouth for a count of 3. Very simple. And if you end up doing a count of 2 or 4, it's not going to make a difference. So you're just going to take a deep breath in through your nose, hold for 3, and then exhale for 3. If you're really stressed and anxious, when you exhale as loud as you can, get all that air out. So you'd be like, really release it. And if you do the 1, 2, 3 technique for a few seconds to a minute, it actually starts relaxing you and getting rid of a lot of the physical stress and anxiety. So it's a very easy way to add into your emotional toolbox, just 1, 2, 3 technique, easy to remember. Okay, so There is more on these slides. And again, I know I'm going to run out of time, so I will absolutely send this so you guys can all have a copy of it. And for now, I'm going to just stop sharing so I can see the chat board because I couldn't see it before and see what questions, thoughts, and comments. I'm sorry, I should have left a little more time. I didn't even realize there's only like 7-8 minutes left, but I'm going to look in the chat board. Or Melissa, are there any questions you saw that I could do? I could do.
Well, you have given a fantastic presentation to this point. Yes, please feel free to take a sip of water. Um, Again, just great information. And for those of you watching, this is a really good time to reach out, right? So we talk about the people that are with you, the people who are at home who may also be dealing with this, and they've heard it all. So now this is an opportunity to talk to somebody like Diane, who is trained in this. Ask questions. You can even just give us a comment. Anything to help sort of get it out to somebody who can certainly help. And Diane is that person. Now, Diane, I do have one question that came in for you. It says, I am tired. My patience is thin. The pandemic has me feeling trapped. I work remotely. I feel like I'm on call 24/7. My mom had a stroke. She's 82. I've been caring for her for over a year. I bathe her. I help her with the toilet. How do I set boundaries? And I know COVID has made this a lot more difficult for people, hasn't it?
Yeah, COVID has, because for a lot of people, they feel uncomfortable bringing in help. And I just want to state, I totally understand that. My client that I saw this morning, who, again, her husband is a traumatic brain injury client, and she has done everything for him for, I think now we're going on almost, it's 9 years. And one of the things that we discussed is she didn't want to bring in more staff. A lot of the staff, once COVID hit, um, they were gone, and she needed to bring in new help. And it was a hard decision for her to make because these nurses could be working other places, and what are the options? What happened and what we thought of is this: you have to think of your mental health, because if your mental health and your physical health starts to fade and you're burning out and you're noticing the symptoms, which I'm so glad to hear that you're self-aware, who will take care of her if you're not there? That's the way you have to think about it. And it took my client about a week or two to make this decision. And she brought in the help. I mean, she's doing everything right. They take the temperature, they're wearing the gloves, they're wearing the mask, there's sanitizer everywhere. But she said, if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to take care of him at all. And then what would happen? And that's something to consider. So yes, setting boundaries might mean bringing in some help. And I know, again, that is really scary for everybody. But if you burn out and you can't be there at all for your mom, that's going to be even a bigger situation. So first, it's looking at people you trust, any friends or family who can help out, even if it's just once a week, that gives you a little time, even if it's for an hour, to take a hot bath, whatever works for you. Go for a walk. Don't know where you live, because I'm in New York, and if you're walking today, wouldn't be good in the snow, but wherever you are. But thinking about that, really doing the weighing, kind of the scales here, because if you burn out, especially mentally and physically, there's no one there to take care of. So a boundary could also be setting a time frame of, during these times where she's safe, you do things for yourself. And also, it's asking for the help from the people you do trust, the other family, extended family, and doing the research too. Like, if you're looking for staff to help in any way, it doesn't always have to be a nurse coming to the house. It could be you're looking for people who do what we call companion care, who will go out and do your errands for you. And, they'll go to the supermarket for you. They will go and pick up, the dry cleaning, the laundry, they'll do the mail, whatever you need, which gives you a little more control, because you can sanitize, you can, spray it, you can do whatever you feel comfortable, but you're going to need help. And it sounds to me that you're fully aware that you're burning out and you need those boundaries. So I want you to think about, what areas do you need the most help in? What areas could you work on currently? Are your basic needs met? Which probably not, because you're, doing so much, but making sure you're eating right, you're sleeping as much as you can, you're drinking as much water as you can, you're getting some exercise, but really making sure, one of my clients, She has made this boundary. This might not be for you, but just a suggestion. She is taking care of her father, and in the morning he wakes up before her, but she knows he's safe where he is, and she will take that extra 10-15 minutes that he stays in bed, even if he's bored, and sometimes he acts out, to just meditate, because she's like, if I don't do that, I'm going to be irritable and snappy and take it out on him, which then causes guilt and stress. And you look at the whole cycle, and she's like, I'd rather him be in bed 10-15 minutes more where he's a little bored, even if he gets a little agitated. This is brain injury, but that I can take care of myself. So when I do get out of bed and I put my feet on the floor, I know I'm going to be there 100% for him. So that is okay. And it's fully okay. And a lot of my clients have to do that with the brain injury, because a lot of them have to catheterize. Like, they literally have to take care of their spouse or their kids or whoever it is from day one, the minute they wake up to the night. And they'll say things like, just kind of as we tell parents, you know what, if you know your child is safe in the crib, and even if they want to get up and they're getting bored and they're crying, if you need those 5 to 10 minutes, take it, as long as you know they're safe, and asking for the help.
Sure. And a follow up to that, just off of your example, someone asks, I take care of my kids and my parents, just like the person you described, but I don't take much time for myself. How do I get over the guilt if I try to take time away from everyone else? And I think that's where people really, really struggle, isn't it, Diane?
The guilt. And I just want to say a few things about the guilt. So, one, it's normal and it's natural to feel guilt. I just want to say that everybody goes through that as parents, as caregivers. We're all going to feel that. So I don't want you to think there's something wrong. It's natural, it's normal, expect it. That's the way it is, especially for women. I hate to say that, not that men don't feel guilt, but women tend to have more of that nurturing upbringing. We're raised to be caregivers. We really are, as moms and nurturers. So we tend, sometimes feel even more guilt. And I see my female clients feeling way worse than my male sometimes, not all the time, but a lot. So, one, know it's normal and natural. Two, expect it. And also know that it's going to take a little while. So do what you need to do for self-care. And when the guilt comes up, remind yourself it's normal and natural, because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. It's not your norm and you're doing it. It feels awkward, but know with practice and doing it after a few weeks, you will feel better. And remember in your head, think of this question. If I don't take care of self-care, of myself, and I burn out, who will take care of my kids and my parents? Think of that question. If I'm so burnt out that I'm either ill, I'm going into the hospital, I've hurt myself physically because I haven't taken care of myself, and I'm not available for them for even 1 week, what would happen? And just thinking of that makes a lot of people go, whoa, I didn't realize how much, how much my, taking a week off would affect other people. So if I can take 10 minutes each day to meditate, that's beneficial to everybody around me. And that's what it is. It's realizing that your self-care benefits everybody who is in your life. And again, you have kids, you want them to see that so they take care of themselves as they get older as well. So you're doing what you know is right so you can be there for them during the hardest times. If not, you will have to hire help. And that's what people don't want to do. So making sure you take care of you is the most important thing. And know that you're going to feel guilty, but it does fade. I promise it does. I have clients a few months later who say, wow, I feel a lot better now. I used to feel guilty, but now I realize, like, I feel so much better, and I'm reacting so much better to my, my father, my mom, my whoever I'm taking care of. And it works. It just takes a little, and you don't have to take big chunks of time. If it's 10 minutes a day that you do for you, that will make a difference. 10 minutes of meditation will make a difference.
Excellent information. We have another question here. It says, I'm struggling with guilt. My mom has Alzheimer's and it is progressing. I know there's going to come a time when I can't care for her at home any longer, but she's terrified of going into memory care or nursing care. And I feel like a bad daughter.
One, while she's still in a space where she has her on and offs, I'm sure. But when she's in a good space, I would go to some places and we would tour while she's here. So she has some control of what she's picking out. So she knows where she wants to go. A lot of times it's that lack of control. And we've seen that. A lot of my clients with brain injury have Alzheimer's and dementia symptoms because of the brain injury. And when we know we're moving them out of the group home into, a lot of them will go into senior living. It's the next step, or assisted living. We will take them on tour so they are in some sort of control of picking and choosing where they go, so they know they feel comfortable with it, and also so you feel more comfortable with the place you chose, and knowing that your mom at that time was good with it. And the other thing is knowing this: when people have Alzheimer's and dementia, we're not trained for that as caregivers. I'm trained in it now with brain injury, but we're not trained in it. And we want our parents or the people we love to get the best care. And the people in the memory, in those memory care units, they are completely 100% trained to be there. And the other part, what makes it great, is they don't take it as personal, because it is not as personal to them. They end up with a very close relationship. Staff becomes family, right? In all of those places, whether it's a group home for brain injury, whether it's assisted living, nurse home, the staff is absolutely part of the family. And the more you get to know them and the more you feel comfortable with them, the easier it gets. But they are the professionals. We're not. And we sometimes need to realize that there is that boundary of what you can do, just knowledge-wise. And when they are taking care of them, that can give you a sense of comfort to know that they're in good hands. And it also gives you a little bit of a break, that you can still have your own life and do things, but you can visit as often as you want. And yes, COVID has taken that away, but thankfully the vaccines are going straight through right now to nursing homes, assisted living. So we're going to be able to visit. Even if you have to get a booster in the new year, we're going to be able to visit. So this can kind of give you the best of both worlds. You can take care of you, make sure she's taken care of, and visit. And visit as often as you can, with your own boundaries of knowing what you can do with your own life and job. But this gives you the best. So look for those places now, go over those places, get the resources all about these places, so you can have some comfort in knowing she was happy in the decision at the time. If she's totally against the decision and she doesn't want to even look, which does happen, I get that, then you need to look for you and you see where you feel your comfort. And there's so many great places, I don't know where you live, but there's so many great places in, the United States where you can get so much good help, and they could be in constant contact with you, and you can always check in and know that they're doing well.
Yeah, and on the heels of that, again, a great answer, and that is absolutely 100% factual. I've sat and talked to people who were in this exact same situation. And one woman in particular comes to mind while we're having this conversation. Her mother had dementia. She's still alive, so she has dementia. It was getting violent. The daughter was trying to take care of the mother in the home, and it just got to a point where she physically could not take care of her mother anymore. Moved her into a community that one of the Arbor communities that deals specifically with memory care. And she said, she was tearing up, and she'd said to me, I got my life back, and I don't feel guilty because I come and see my mom every single day. And she is getting care here that I could never provide for her. And her dementia actually, to this point, stabilized because she was receiving the care that her daughter could not provide. And so a great answer there, Diane. Thank you. We've got more questions here. Says, my parents are not the same people with Alzheimer's. And when they say things that show that they have no filter, it breaks my heart. How do I get through this?
I'm only smiling because my brain injury clients have the same exact thing, and I learned that the hard way. They have absolutely no filter. And one thing that makes it a lot easier for a lot of my clients, spouses, kids, is knowing it has nothing to do with us. It's not personal. It's the disease. It's not a representation of who they are. And that's really important to remember. You want to remember who they were. Sometimes the illness just overtakes them. I mean, it's the best way I could think about it. And I get that it's very heartbreaking to watch, but what you're watching is not them. you're watching an illness. And I want you to remember that. Watching an illness is not who they are, their heart, their soul, and remembering who they were. And also knowing too, with this, with Alzheimer's, dementia, all that, sometimes you can go there and they're great and they will be fine. And other times they'll have no filter, or they won't remember who you are, or they get violent or angry, and that happens. And expecting that, again, this is part of the illness. And I think for a lot of my clients, what I've known has worked for their caregivers was getting all the information. A lot of my clients would be so upset because they didn't realize, a lot of the brain injury, they napped in the middle of the day, and they'd be like, what, they don't want to spend time with you? All of a sudden they're tired and fatigued. They would get nasty. That was a big one. They wouldn't remember anything. And the spouses or the parent, everybody was taking it so personally. And the more information they had about the illness, the more they realized this had nothing to do with their loved one. It was the illness that took over. And it gives you a lot more information to know what to expect and to handle it. And the other thing is, if it's still getting to you, I do suggest therapy or a support group for people who are dealing with this. It really helps. I have said that to a lot of my clients, because the person you love is no longer the same person. But again, they still are in their heart and soul. It's the illness, the disease, whatever word you'd like to say, has taken over. So the more information you have, and also getting the help for yourself, because that's really stressful being a caregiver. And I always suggest, one thing we've learned as therapists is we're supposed to go to therapy, like once, not often, but once every few months, to release what we're holding on to, because we're caregivers. And that's so important. And thinking about the same thing for you, watching that, being a caregiver, what are you doing to release all of that? And to remember, it's not personal, but if it's becoming that way, then really going and getting the extra help is really important. And not permanently, but just for a few months with a therapist or a social worker, counselor who understands, who specializes in those, areas. And there are people who specialize, and a lot of the memory care units can give you recommendations of neurologists, neuropsychologists, people who would really be able to talk to you and help you through this and give you more of an understanding of why they're going through this and how it's not really who they are, and that it's not personal at all.
Yeah, and here's a tricky situation and for this question, and I really feel for the poster here. I've been caring for my parent for several years now. My parent will not go along with caregivers that I have brought in to help. Um, I have begun a search for assisted living, but my husband is afraid that I will regret it and be in a worse mental state if I do this. What do I do? So this person's trying to seek help, but they're having internal pressure that's pulling them in multiple directions, and they're trying to do some of the things that you have stated, Diane, that you need to do for the self-care.
So you really, in that situation, I want you to think about the why you would put her in a memory. What is your why? Really thinking about the why behind it. Because sometimes people do it in the wrong reasons, meaning they just react, they can't take it anymore, they're burnt out, and they put a family member into assisted living, nursing home when they weren't ready. Not that they're client, but they weren't ready. So you need to know the why behind it. And you also need to know and expect that you will have some on and off thoughts. Everybody does. I watch a lot of my clients put their spouses, their kids into group homes, which is the same thing in the brain injury. And it was a really hard decision. And a lot of them have gone back and forth. But the best way for them to make the decision was to sit down with the places and find out every piece of information. And one of the things, Melissa, you were saying before, when you put somebody in assisted living, a nursing home, why they benefit is, especially for Alzheimer's and dementia, is they get not just the medical care, but they get the cognitive care. And that's really important. When people have Alzheimer's, dementia, they need cognitive therapy, which is therapy for the memory. And they won't get that at home. They need the socialization of other people. They get that way more. I remember when we put my mother-in-law into a nursing home, we had no choice because she had a wet stroke. I have to tell you, she was living alone. And even though we were visiting her all the time, it wasn't the same thing. When we dropped off at the nursing home, my husband was crying. I was crying. Is this the right thing? I'd have to say within a month, every time we went there, she was having a ball. I'm not saying she even remembered who anybody was like every day of the other people. She was playing cards every day. She was playing bingo every day. She was eating better. She was socializing. She had a better social life in there than she did out because they provided entertainment. There was socialization, other people there. They provided physical therapy. They provided cognitive therapy. Those are things she's not getting at home. And when you see that, it's a way different. You know, we always have this fear of what it looks like putting somebody in an assisted living or nursing home. We have a fear because we make this whole assumption of what it looks like, or we listen to some of the fears of other people. But the truth is, when you go see them, I mean, I've been to different arbors all over, and they look like they have a better life than I do. Like sometimes I go in and I'm like, my God, they're out to dinner, they're hanging out, they're playing piano, they're listening to a singer, they're having an event tomorrow night. The difference is amazing. And it really makes a difference. And I think once you see them and what they're getting and the benefits it plays, it'll take away. But also remember this, worst comes to worst and you don't like it or it's not a right fit, nothing is permanent. You don't have to keep somebody there. You can take them out. You can switch places. It's always an option. Nothing is permanent. So you can, make a decision if it's not working. And we've seen that. It's okay too as well. And if you know you're going to need the extra help, then sit down with a therapist or support group where you can meet with other people who've been in your shoes, who can empathize and help you through this. It is a tough time because remember, you're grieving. You're grieving the life that you used to have with your parents or whoever it is you love. You're grieving the changes. They're not the same person. You're grieving your old normal way of spending time with them. We're grieving. That's a lot. And grief is a process. So you might need some grief counseling, and that's an important piece for a lot of people. And if you do drop them off at a place like assisted living nursing home, a lot of them have the support groups there. Maybe not with COVID, there may be online, or they can send you to a support group that's online that's really helpful for you. The resources are always great at those places, better than we can say individually. Even as a therapist, I will send my clients to, different places and be like, here's the resources. They will know it's what they do for a living full time. So having a little trust in that, getting the information and getting the extra help if you need, way important. But it won't be an easy decision and you do need to grieve.
Yeah, you've had quite a few people thank you for this presentation.
I'm sorry, I'm babbling with all my answers, but there's no easy answer because everything's individual. Grieving's individual. What you want to do is individual, and every person in their illness. You could have 5 people have Alzheimer's and they all feel differently, and the families feel different. Like I said, I've worked with brain injury for over 15 years. I've never seen one brain injury client that's exact like the other. So very individual. So do what's best for you and the people you love.
Yeah, and it's all great advice. I think we've all found ourselves in a position to be caregivers, whether it's an elderly parent, a child, a spouse, at some point in our lives, and you've really given a lot of people food for thought. So, Diane, if there's somebody that's watching right now and wants to perhaps have maybe a private conversation with you, how can they get in touch with you? What are some good ways to contact you?
I'm going to put my email up here because if you do have any other questions, for whatever reason, I know for me, when I listen to a presentation, I think about it, then I have questions like hours later, but it's over. And I always wish I had an email. Here's my email. I'm Diane, DL Counseling 2014 at Gmail. I will send over the PowerPoint, which has my email at the end as well. So if you look over the information and you have a question or a thought, please feel free to email out and let me know. It might take me a day or two because for some reason, sometimes it goes to spam, but I will find it. So just email me and I will absolutely respond because I know this is tough for everybody and COVID has made it a lot tougher. But thank you for having me here too with all this information. I'm glad that I was able to give it and I appreciate you having me here at Arbor.
Yeah, and I'm just going to take the words from Bonnie, who says, God bless you and all the caregivers, XOXO. And I feel the
Thank you, Bonnie.
way. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing your knowledge with us. As always, we absolutely appreciate you and having the ability to chat with you and answer questions and discuss your knowledge with all of us. So thank you for, again, taking the time to spend with us here this evening. And of course, we thank all of you for watching Senior Living Live. You can check out our website at www.seniorlivinglive.com. We've got a vault of information all about senior living, and it is available all day, every day. As always, we appreciate you, the viewer, tuning in and joining us and being a part of the conversation. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye. Have a great day, everybody.